Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the B block or second section of our Cannabis Coast to Coast News show. Did you know that the second largest medical cannabis market in Europe is in Great Britain? It is, and it's second only to Germany. Now, Curaleaf, one of the largest multi-state operators in the U.S., is banking on the development of the medical market in the UK. According to Prohibition Partners, the number of medical patients in Great Britain represents less than 10% of the total number of patients who could benefit from plant medicine. In order to educate the medical community here, Curaleaf has formed a partnership with the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society and with Curaleaf Labs. The purpose and goal to make sure that those patients who can benefit from the plant for its medicinal benefits can get their doctors on board to prescribe it. With more from the UK, here's Dave Barton.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with the UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. £13.3 billion in 10 years? That's the amount of money that could be unlocked across the British economy if NHS access to medical cannabis was expanded. According to a report commissioned by Curaleaf, thousands of people with long-term health conditions across the UK could return to the workplace, and hospital admissions could be reduced by up to 28% if more doctors working for the NHS were able to issue CBPM prescriptions. Currently, medical cannabis is only available in the UK via the NHS for a few severe conditions, meaning the majority of CBPM patients pay hundreds of pounds per month to private clinics and pharmacies. A change in the law and in the way that medical cannabis is prescribed and accessed would improve lives, relieve pressure on the NHS, and support the government's 5-year plan to get more people working. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There are two news notes from two of the smallest states in the United States, Delaware and Rhode Island. Delaware just opened its adult use market and now is already allowing more counties in that state to offer licenses, while Rhode Island is finally issuing their first adult use licenses. 3 years after the Ocean State introduced legal adult use regulations, the Rhode Island Cannabis Control Commission announced this week they will be offering 24 adult use dispensary licenses through the end of this year. This weekend in Boston was the 36th Annual Freedom Rally. The Talking Joints memo writer and publisher Chris Faraone was on hand and files this report.
All right, Chris Faraone here, 36th Annual Boston Freedom Rally. Big deal here. Mount Michael Malta in the background over there, main stage back there, tens of thousands of people, Parkman bandstand right there. Brandy Blaze just went on. We just had a big tribute to Bill Downing, legendary activist, one of the founders of the Freedom Rally. Props to Masscan for really pulling this off again. You know, the Freedom Rally has a legendary history of terrible weather. I think the second one was rained out. It's been rained out years past. They've lost a ton of money. Not this year. Perfect weather, 2 days in a row. It's also not always 2 days, so just an absolute glorious event. And, you know, tribute to activists, there's education, there's plenty of weed, and there's a lot of freedom. I was just looking at this recently. Years ago, I think so, as far back as like 20 years ago, they'd arrest about 150, 160 people a year here. That went on your permanent record. Of course, those records are now expunged, but I can't stress enough, there's a reason that this happens here on Boston Common, and that reason is that the activism's not done, right? The second Freedom Rally 35 years ago was held right on the State House steps, and of course, the Golden Dome is still in the background, and still till this day, Masscan, which of course is, you know, our advocacy group in Massachusetts. The reason we have cannabis here today, they are advocating for a number of bills on Beacon Hill still regarding everything from medical cannabis to potency limits. So it's important. The fight's not over, so it's a big party, no doubt, but also paying tribute to activists and, you know, letting people know about, you know, what still has to be done. So props to Masscan on number 36, and I'll see you again next year. Never miss one.
Now let's take a look at what else is going on in the Bay State. Here's Curtis Emery.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. a conclusion to the 2-year-long legal battle of Shannon O'Brien and Deborah Goldberg and O'Brien's return to the CCC. Yes, the state had cleared Chairwoman Shannon O'Brien to return to the CCC after her leave of absence started in 2023. However, Deborah Goldberg seemed to want to block her return and filed an appeal to keep O'Brien from returning. However, as of September 18th, Goldberg announced she will no longer be pursuing that appeal, giving O'Brien the green light to return to the CCC without any more interference from the treasurer. Also in mass news, the state celebrates $1.3 billion in sales this year alone, with the highest grossing month so far being August, with a total combined sale of $157 million. That includes both recreational or adult use sales and medical sales. It seems like cannabis is off to the races here in Mass, with only more money to be made and more people being serviced and served by our great dispensaries here in the state. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Next up is the Arizona Cannabis Report with Karen Black. This week she looks at the Health Department's Fungal Awareness Week as well as the Medical Marijuana Testing Council's meeting. Here's Karen.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona's health regulators are putting renewed focus on fungal contamination risks. The Department of Health Services is observing Fungal Disease Awareness Week, and this comes as the Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council met September 15th to address transparency concerns about lab enforcement records and fungal testing protocols. The timing is significant. Arizona saw multiple cannabis product recalls for aspergillus contamination this year. Council members pushed for improved public access to testing facility violations, with the Department of Health Services confirming that deficiency reports are available on AZ CareCheck. Not too long ago, Arizona State University research found 16% of seized cannabis samples contained dangerous mycotoxins, underscoring why mandatory aspergillus testing for inhalable products remains critical for immunocompromised medical cannabis patients. Meanwhile, Arizona's hemp sector finally has some good news after months of negative headlines about intoxicating hemp product bans. The Hemp Industry Trade Association of Arizona hosted a successful fiber harvest demonstration Monday in Yuma, featuring Arizona's leading hemp fiber grower, Dan Noel. The event showcased sustainable agriculture benefits, like that hemp uses 75% less water than alfalfa and cools soil by 20 degrees. The association also launched their Adopt an Acre of Hemp initiative, signaling renewed investment in industrial hemp despite regulatory challenges with hemp-based THC products. On the education front, Life is Chill announced Arizona's first Cannabis Wellness Expo targeting seniors 55 and older. The free December 9th event at Phoenix Shrine Auditorium addresses growing demand for cannabis education among mature consumers and will feature workshops on product labels, dispensary navigation, and therapeutic applications, complete with transportation from independent living communities. And finally, Sunday Goods opened its fourth Arizona location in Surprise. They're running a grand opening promotion through October 3rd, and they're featuring a custom golf cart giveaway. The move demonstrates continued retail expansion despite industry-wide market pressures here in the Grand Canyon State. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Oklahoma continues to suffer from the handling of an overexpansion of medical licenses when that state first started their medical-only program. Now that state has another problem with an influx of illegal operators from China. Oklahoma awarded 14,000 licenses for the sale of medical cannabis when they first opened in 2021. That number is now down to about 5,000 operators, as reported by Politico. That same report claims that growers were able to produce 64 times the amount of cannabis that was sold and consumed. With more from Oklahoma, here's Kimmie Cannabis.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma law enforcement told Congress last week that the state's cannabis industry has been overrun by foreign nationals, mostly from China. They say these groups have infiltrated the market that launched in 2019, peaked with nearly 14,000 licensed businesses in 2021, and has now dropped to about 5,000. Of those, around 2,000 are cultivators. Law enforcement claims to have shut down 6,000 of these operations. And while the market itself clearly played a role, officials argue the outside influence has had a major impact. And with Oklahoma law enforcement on this Reefer Madness mission, it's even more important to get those signatures for State Question 837 to put adult use cannabis on the ballot in 2026. And now, on a lighter note, a new product is making its debut in our state, and the name alone will grab your attention. It's called Nudes. The creator, who is known as Favy, alongside his beautiful wife Ashley, says it's not just a name, it's a vibe. Favy has actually been rolling joints with noodles for years. That quirky tradition inspired their signature hand-rolled hash holes, aka glory holes. And beyond the fun name, there's a real innovation here. The noodle crutches, what many call tips or filters, are biodegradable and not as harsh as cardboard. So if you're chasing white ash, oil rings, smooth pulls, and unforgettable flavor, Nudes might just be your new go-to smoke. I'm super excited to try these because I actually roll my joints using rotini noodles at home. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. I'm Kimmie Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
When it comes to the tribal lands movement in the cannabis industry, only one reporter continues to consistently keep us updated on what's going on, and that's Tina Tasaka, who reports from Nevada every week.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The UNLV Cannabis Policy Institute is doing more than rolling the dice. At a recent showcase on September 5th, Congresswoman Dina Titus, co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, gave a special address to kick off the event alongside other notable speakers and delegates. This student showcase allowed for students to give 5-minute presentations. Undergrad and grad students delivered research, writing, and policy analysis related to cannabis, such as law, health, psychology, regulation, policy, and more. Key highlights from the students include these studies: medical innovation, creating synthetic CBD alternatives to study treatments like epilepsy, despite federal limits. Illicit market risks. Nevada loses $370 million in untaxed sales with rising youth use and dangerous synthetics. Public health and equity. 2.5% of U.S. adults show cannabis use disorder with disparities across communities. Events like this help bring more visibility to lesser-known risks and encourage public health interventions. Public awareness is key. It's been 5 months since the Sequan tribe and Mr. Alex Ayan opened San Diego's county's first legal cannabis consumption lounge, Sessions by the Bay. With tribal cannabis expanding, I wanted to circle back to this location for a fall spotlight. Sessions by the Bay is making waves culturally, socially, and economically. This 16,000 square foot, 3-story destination blends premium cannabis, infused cuisine, and immersive art to create a vibrant, welcoming space for all. Thanks to California's Assembly Bill 1775, visitors can legally enjoy cannabis on site, elevating the state's cannabis lifestyle, already generating millions in local tax revenue to support community programs and infrastructure. Sessions by the Bay is more than a lounge. It's a cultural hub and a major economic driver with exciting plans for the future, including a rooftop bar. Imagine those views and sunsets. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, and this is Bird reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I have some very interesting news to report today about my hometown in Bensonville, Illinois, which is attached to O'Hare. There was a company there called Midwest Goods, LLC, that was raided by Pam Bondi, by RFK Jr., by the DEA, by the U.S. Marshals, and more. They were raided specifically because they've been buying vapes from China for many, many years. So, long story short, they're cracking down on illegal vapes from out of the country, specifically China. They have THC in them, tons of other chemicals. They're non-regulated. They raided and took over 600,000 vapes from Midwest Goods, Inc. out of Bensonville, Illinois, my hometown. Then after that, Pam Bondi and RFK Jr. both did big speeches about the raid and how they're cracking down on illegal vapes from China. No arrests were made. They just took all their product, and they still been doing it, but that's what happened in my hometown. That was interesting. In other news, Governor Pritzker, pretty much kind of out of nowhere, just threatened possible executive order in regards to increasing the requirements to purchase and sell hemp in the state. So Pritzker is saying that if the legislature doesn't come up with a plan to regulate the sale of hemp more efficiently and more safely, he's going to come in and do an executive order to change that. He cites that his main concern for this executive order is the children. Pritzker's only worried about the children. So if we can't figure it out, then he's going to have to come in and tell us what to do. I agree with that statement, but the problem is Pritzker is part owner and friends with owners of commercial marijuana dispensaries who pretty much want to take over hemp sales, so you can't just sell hemp anywhere, but only in the dispensary. So at the same time, there needs to be more regulation for hemp to protect children, but at the same time, it's got to be for the right reasons. But anyways, that sums it up for the Chicagoland, Illinois area news. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy. This is Bird reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This was the first week of adult use sales in the state of Minnesota, which is fast becoming a vibrant market. Our correspondent Alicia Bellamy is one of the lucky ones who has a micro license, and she has an update on what's going on in the land of 10,000 lakes.
I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota report. This week, I want to talk a little bit about the educational rollout in the Minnesota cannabis space. We have the Minnesota Craft Cannabis Guild, we have Sumain Roots, and the Minnesota Cannabis College, which I've talked about several times. I do sit on the board of that organization. These are non-accredited cannabis classes and courses that you can take here in Minnesota. Let's talk a little bit about the Minnesota Craft Cannabis Guild, where they are very big into craft cannabis. The way we handle terpenes, terpene tasting, and also just the plant from seed to consumption, and how it should be more of a ritual than just a eighth or just a joint. We also have Sumain Roots. Sumain Roots is a majority deaf-owned company that has goals of teaching hearing impaired people how to get into the cannabis industry. And then we have the Minnesota Cannabis College, which I am so happy to be a part of. Like I said in a prior report, we got a $250,000 grant to teach. We will be teaching about cultivation, a 13-week course, and retail for a bud tender, which will be a 5-week course. We're so excited to get started. This is your Minnesota report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Ohio sales have surpassed the $3 billion mark, and recreational sales have increased 224% since December 2024. And with the continued excitement of pre-rolls now being available in Ohio, we have 3 new dispensaries around town in Girard, Middleton, and Proctorville. So welcome to Ohio, and let's see these continued growth in sales. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally, did you happen to see Snoop Dogg this week? I mean, the rapper and hip-hop legend is everywhere. He's a judge on The Voice this season, and you know he'll be at the Olympics again with NBC. He is also a shrewd businessman and is now an investor in the emerging medical cannabis market in the UK. His venture investment fund is called Casa Verde Capital, and his group put in 4.5 million pounds, or just over $5 million to the medical cannabis company Ma Medica. It's good to be Snoop Dogg, and he is quickly becoming the biggest cannabis celebrity in the world. That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. For Karen Black, Dave Barton, and Tina Tasaka, I'm Kimmie Cannabis. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
This is mold on wheat. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean,
the quicker picker-upper. I love that.
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Elena Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Elena Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions, and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com